Okay, so we're going to start a series on Eretz Yisrael with basic outlines of the main topic. So everybody has a framework. We always read about it in the Torah. It goes by. We don't take in the stuff. I mean, I've even learned, because the Bavli is written in Babylonia, the topics of Eretz Yisrael arise. Sort of naturally in context of something else, but they never given definitive. So even though I've learned many of the Gemaras, I never have like a view of the whole subject, which you can pick up in other areas, because the Bavli is very, in that sense, when you go into the yeshivas, you learn they do it topic by topic. Stuff about Eretz Yisrael is sort of a little here, a little there, and it doesn't come together. So I'd like to do a little about it. Okay, so the first most obvious topic is, what is Eretz Yisrael? All right, as I mentioned on the sheet, there are. How do we know what is Eretz Yisrael? The answer is that there are four basic sources giving the boundaries, quote unquote, the boundaries. First is the land that is promised to Abraham Avinu in Bereshis. That's the first one. Second one is that which is given in Parshas Mas'eh at the end of Bamidbar, as finally the second generation is about to come into Eretz Yisrael. God tells them this is going to be the boundaries of the country. Okay. The third one is in Sifrei Yehoshua and Shoftim. When I wrote that line, Sifrei Yehoshua and Shoftim, for the moment I forgot that in my head, for some reason, I was thinking from the story, it emerges what the boundaries were. No, in Sefer Yehoshua, starting in chapter 14, I think chapter 13 lists what they received in the Ever Hayarden that Moshe Rabbeinu gave to Reuven, Gad, and half of the Shevet Menashe. And then starting in chapter 14 through chapter 19, the Sefer Yehoshua describes the boundaries of what goes to every single tribe. Okay, it goes on there. There's a full description. I include the Sefer Shoftim as well, because from these stories, even what was written in Sefer Yehoshua, okay, it's quite clear that Bnei Israel did not capture the whole country. And part of the recurring problem is that in many places they could not capture, and that they settled. They made peace with the fact that they did not capture the whole country. So between what is described in Sefer Yehoshua as what was given to them and what the reality is, they're not exactly the same, okay? And in fact, it's usually understood that since they did not cover the whole country, the detailed description in Sefer Yehoshua is that when they capture it later on, it will have the same kedusha as when they first came in. Okay, some areas were captured, let's say, only under David HaMelech, so they have the kedusha as Eretz Yisrael, the same as that which when the Jews came into the country. Okay,
intentionally you don't mention Ezra?
What?
Intentionally you don't mention Ezra? Intentionally you don't mention Ezra and Nehemiah?
I'm talking about Bayaharetz now. I didn't get to that.
Okay.
I didn't get to it. Still talking about Bayaharetz.
Okay.
The last boundaries of the country are then after Galut Bavel, we come back to Shivat Zion, the period of Shivat Zion, of returning. Okay. And descriptions of the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael. Okay, that's kind of an interesting subject all of its own. It's mentioned in a couple of places in Shas talk about areas. Are they in Eretz Yisrael? Do they have Kedushat Haaretz and Bayit Sheni or not? That's one issue. And in Yerushalmi, there are certain Braitot, there are certain Tanaitic sources that actually give parts of the boundaries of the country. Turns out in the 70s, I think, they discovered a mosaic in a place called Rehov. It's basically part of Kibbutz Emek HaNatziv nowadays, in Emek Beit She'an. And when they first were given this area, so they started preparing the ground for agriculture. And sure enough, they found an old village on a tail there. In the shul in the village, there was a mosaic. Of all things in the mosaic, is not decorations, is a brisa, the brisa of the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael. And it's the most detailed description there is, most detailed description. And why they were concerned, namely, Beit She'an did not have Kedusha Ta'aretz in the second Beis HaMikdash. It did not. And there are Gemaras about that. But they were concerned about the boundaries, and then a lot of produce came to them from apparently other areas. So it was very important to them to worry about Trumos and Maisos if there's stuff that came from other areas was in Eretz Yisrael or not. Okay, and the Brisa has received very detailed treatment, especially Yaakov Zussman in Yerushalayim was one of the major people who studied the Brisa. As far as Hilchot Eretz Yisrael and the knowledge of the country, in the periods of the Rishonim, the most important probably avenue into knowing Hilchot Eretz Yisrael is, besides the Gemaras in the Bavli, of course there is a Maseches Roim in Talmud Yerushalmi, and in general it wasn't studied the same way as the Bavli for historical reasons. But one of the Balei HaTosfos of Shimshon Mishans wrote a commentary to the Mishnah of Zroim, in which he incorporated all the material, all necessary material from Toseftas, Brises, and from the Bavli and the Yerushalmi Maseches Zroim, the Seder Zroim. That was number one. Shimshon Mishans, how shall I say it? He was a great-great-grandson of Rashi. We'll take out a moment just to give you the family of Rashi. Rashi's grandsons, the ones that we know, and there are others, but the ones that are in our consciousness are Rashbam, Rav Shmuel bar Rabbi Meir, and Rabbeinu Yaakov, which is whom we call Rabbeinu Tam, Yaakov Ish Tam, right? He's called Rabbeinu Tam. Rabbeinu Tam is the main founder of the Tosafist school in France, the genius par excellence. Okay. His Rashbam's son, Rabbeinu Yitzchak, is Rabbeinu Yitzchak Hazaken Ri Bal HaTosfos. As Professor Soloveitchik says, Rabbeinu Tam was the ultimate genius, but could not write. It was the Ri who was the genius who was able to write. So because of him, we have the whole Torah, and we have the whole creativity of Rabbeinu Tam. Okay. Through a cousin's cousin, all right, and you go down one generation after that, okay, below the Ri, then you get Rabbeinu Shimshon Mishans. So how's it go? The Rashbam and Rabbeinu Tam are grandsons. Ri Hazaken is a great-grandson. And through another line, Rav Shimshon Mishans is a great-great-grandson of Rashi. So and his Tosas are the most authoritative and considered the highest, most highly developed Tosas of the students of the Ri that recorded now the work of all the Balei HaTosfos.
Isaac, when you see all the Tosfos with Rabbeinu Tam, you're saying he didn't write that; it was written by somebody else.
Yes. All Tosfos is reportory. What Professor Soloveitchik says is reportorial, that they that the student, the teacher lectured, the student wrote in front of him, and then the student afterwards showed it to the teacher. So every Tosis that you have is usually not written by the person who said it, written by a student. So the Tosis we have, major students are, like I say, the Ri, and his students are Rabbeinu Shimshon Mishans is the premier, his son Rabbeinu Chanan, and then there's a Tosus Baruch, and then I think there's Rabbi Yehuda Paris. Okay, those are the four main writers of Tosis that we have. And on you have to, in Professor Auerbach's book, Baalei HaTosis, you'll find out which Tosis in our Gemara is the one who wrote the one that's on the printed page. Okay, but meanwhile, loads of other work of Baalei HaTosis is in other sources, like the Yerzurua and others. Okay, the later is interesting. Is already Rabbi Ashtari Haparchi, whom I mentioned on the sheet. Okay, he's in the generation. He sort of overlapped with the Rajba and the Rajba students, the Rajba in Spain, the Rabbeinu Tam, and the Ran and the Ritva. Okay. So he's later, and he went to Eretz Yisrael, came to Eretz Yisrael. And he was not, and he wrote the book Kaftor V'Ferach. It is said he had a teacher, Rabbeinu Osher, but it's not clear that it's our usual Rabbeinu Osher ben Yechiel the Rosh. We don't know that. That's up for grabs, so to say. Yeah, it's up for grabs. However, he wrote the book Kaftor V'Ferach about had two issues: Hilchos Eretz Yisrael, identifying the biblical and Talmudic places in Eretz Yisrael in his time. And it seems that he is the first one. The interesting thing is, he is the first one that created the principle, is that if you wanted to know an original place, you looked at the Arabic name. And if the Arabic name could easily be seen as a corruption of Hebrew, you could work your way back and identify places by that. He was the one that created that. So in the history of geography, not only of the Hilchos Eretz Yisrael, he cared about that tremendously, but the history of the geography of Eretz Yisrael, archaeologists trying to describe which tel is what place and all of that. He is sort of the first. He was not the first traveler in the Middle Ages. It was our Binyamin Mitudela, but he was the first one that apparently did it in great detail, and came up with that principle as a way of identifying places. So that's already interesting in its own right. Okay, all right. So that's sort of let's leave that as the introduction, and as they say, let's go to the share screen and start doing a little learning at it. Okay. All right. Let me get rid of some stuff here. Where is it? Here I go. All right. Ron. Okay, we're good. Let me go further up. Okay. So the first thing is we want to talk the main brisa. The first thing is a brisa that wants to give a sense of how the holiness of the land, Kedushat Eretz Yisrael, its sanctity, kicks in with regard to certain halachot. Okay, and the brisa is a sifra, Torah's Kohanim, on the Parshas Bahar. Okay, so the Torah says, "Daber el bnei Yisrael v'yamarta elahem, kisavo el ha'aretz asher ani nosen lachem." When you will come to the land that I give to you, v'shavsa ha'aretz shabos l'Hashem. Okay, that's the opening of Parshas Bahar, where Parshas Bahar talks about all the laws of Shemitah and Yovel. And indeed, it opens up with Shemitah. Sheishanim tizra sodecha, v'sheishanim tizmor kamecha, v'yasaftu es tevuasa. Okay, so what does the brisa say? The Sifra, the Torah's Kohanim. Remember, that's a Tanaitic The Sifra called Torat Kohanim is a Tanaitic midrash halacha. It's a halachic midrash that expounds on the psukim. Kisavo, Yachol Mishabo Le'ever Hayarden. You would think that as soon as the Jews crossed into the part that was on the east of the Jordan, then when they came into Edom and they started making their way up, okay, and that all of a sudden they have to start counting the 6 years for Shemitah. Tamad Loma El Haaretz, Eretz HaMiyuchedes, a very specific country. Yachol Mishaba'u La'amonu Moav, Tamad Lomar Asher Ani Nosein Lachem V'lo Amonu Moav. Well, Amonu Moav is Eva Hayarden, so he's just, the point is he wants to really pin it down. So it's really Eretz Yisrael. And Ammon and Moab, of course, the Torah said we're not giving Ammon and Moab to Bnei Israel because Ki Livnei Lot Nasati Yerusha. Ammon and Moab are descendants of Lot, and that area stays to them. We don't capture it. Minayin ato omer kivshu avalo chilku. Maybe the counting of these 6 years starts as soon as the conquest of the land is finished, but yet they haven't divvied up the land. Or maybe they divvied up chilkula mishpachos, v'lo chilkula batei avos. Apparently mishpachos is much larger than batei avos. So they started a rough outline of the country for this group of families, but they didn't go to an actual family. Or maybe you start counting even before each individual person knows his piece of land. Maybe you start counting the 6 years in order to start the count for Shemitah. Talmud Lomar, the pasuk says, Sadecha, right? Sheyehei kol echad ve'echad makir sadehu. A person has to know his. Karmacha, isn't that what it said in your vineyard? Sheyehei kol echad ve'echad makiras karmo. Nimtzeso ato omer, what you come out with is the following. Kevon she'avru Yisrael es Hayarden, as soon as they cross into the country, nischayvu b'chala. That's we'll give the definition later. That's after you bake dough, you take off a piece to give to a kohen. Uba arla, immediately when they came, if they planted something when they showed up, you wait 3 years before you take anything from it. Uba chadash, whenever there is a new harvest of wheat, you have to wait till the 16th day of Nisan. And indeed, higia shisha asar b'Nisan is chayvu ba'omer. Sha'u chamishim sh'yon nischayvu b'shtei halechem. Remember, the omer is brought from barley on Pesach, on the second day of Pesach, and shtei halechem they're both minchas, they're both flour offerings. And the shtei halechem is brought on Shavuot from the wheat harvest, okay? Now, what the Omer allows that you use the new harvest everywhere for every people, and the Shtei Halechem allows that in the Beis Hamikdash they start using the new harvest. If you bring a mincha to the Beis Hamikdash between Pesach and Shavuot, it still has to be Yoshan. It can't be Chodesh yet. Okay, even though you privately can eat Yashan, you can't use it until after Shavuot. Okay, all right. Now these matters are learned from other psukim. Okay, what's important to us is what comes. What's this 14 years? This 14 years is this discussion is always referred to in the Gemara as kivshu v'chilku, or kibush v'chiluk, namely the process of conquering Eretz Yisrael and divvying up the country down to each individual owner of property, that was a process of 14 years. That's when the whole issue of Trumos and Maisros kick in. Hischilu Morim Lishmita, that's when you start counting Shemitah. That's what over here. So the Chok Karmacho, what he says. So this statement is a summary of when all the mitzvahs hatliyos ba'aretz, when they started kicking in. And it says after 14 years, they started counting for Shemitah. So that means La'esrim v'yachas asu Shemitah, the 21st year was Shemitah. And the 64th year, L'shishim v'arba, that's when they first did yoga. So that's the laws of the holiness of the land kicked in a couple of stages. There was stuff that kicked in when they first arrived, very few laws, and then others had to wait to possession of the property. Okay, the possession of the property. All right, and then the regular counting of Shemitah and Yovel kicks in. Okay.
Isaac, is any of this recorded in Yoshua, or is this just?
Well, no, this is the Kibush V'Chiluk is recorded in Yehoshua. I'm not sure the 14 years. I'll figure it out from there. Probably, my guess is how shall I say it? Yeah. My guess is Yehoshua is considered about 50, 52 years old when this week Shlach, he goes to Eretz Yisrael in the Chet of the Meraglim. He's something around in his 50, 52 years. Or by the Chet Egel, he's 52. So give another 40 years. So give another 40 years. So that puts him 92 when he came into Eretz Yisrael. And he died at 110. So you're talking about 18 years. And then, of course, he retired. He retired after the process was done. And it says when he got old. Okay. So this whole, so the 14 years, so it's sort of deduced that it was a process of 14 years. It's probably in Seder Olam. Okay. It's probably in Seder Olam. If I get a chance, I'll look it up. I'll tell you next time. Okay. All right. So so now what I want to do is I want to give a list of the mitzvahs, very pithy, very short statements in the Rambam of what they are and how they and what is the law relative to Eretz Yisrael, outside Eretz Yisrael. Just a little background to each of them. Okay. So we're starting out to talk about what? Man has a field. Question is, what can he plant there? What can't he plant there? So the first thing to talk about is really kilayim. Okay. All right. So here the Rambam starts. So we're in Hilchas Kilayim. And I want to go through all the mitzvahs. Still about 10, 11 of them. It takes us a couple of lectures, but then there'll be at least a short outline of what goes on. Then we'll go to another topic and we'll come back to other stuff about Eretz Yisrael at another time. Hazoreah shnei minei zroim ki echad be'eretz Yisrael lokeh. Okay. Why? It's a lav sheyesh bo maaseh, so lashes is the punishment. Okay. Shenema sadcha lo sizra kilayim. So that's kilei zeroim, 2 different seeds. Okay. Details there'll be loads of details. All right. We're not going to do those. We want the basic outline. Umutal Yisrael is roa kilei zroim biyado b'chutz ha'aretz. Outside of Eretz Yisrael, you can even plant them together. Furthermore, afilu le'arev zro hazroim lechatchila. You take a sack of one seed, another sack of other seeds, you mix them up, and now you throw them and plant them. You're allowed to in chutz la'aretz. Ulezaram b'chutz la'aretz mutar. Udvarim elu divrei kabbalah. What does that mean? In context, what that means is that there's no, excuse me, there's no explicit There's no explicit tradition, Mishnaic tradition, Tanaitic tradition in this. And it took me, I forgot that I actually learned it not too long ago. It's in Kedusha. I'm down at the bottom of the page in the footnote. Okay, I'll just summarize it. It turns out Rav Yosef, he's an Amora in Bavel. So he planted mixed seeds. He planted them. So Abaye asked him. We learned in the Mishnah that Kilayim and Chutz La'aretz is Divrei Sofrim. So the Gemara answers, no. Rav Yosef answered him, no. Kilei hakerem, if you have seeds and grapes, okay, in the vineyard, that you're forbidden in Chutz La'aretz. But two ordinary seeds of kinds of just foods that grow, not vines, that's mutar. And then the Gemara discusses it for a second, okay? And the Gemara gives a reason, and the Rambam will prove it. So the point is, there was no explicit statement that you're allowed to do it. Rather, Rabbi Yosef did it. Abaya asked him that maybe you're forbidden, and he gave an answer. So apparently, it seemed to have been received that it's okay. That it's okay. And there's no Tanaitic source, and that's what the Rambam means here. Dvorim elu, divrei Kabbalah. Okay, that's what he means. Okay, next. Ein osur mishum kilei ha'azroim, ela hazroim ha'reuyim lamachal adam. Okay. Seeds of plants have to be edible. You can't mix them. Alalasovim hamorim v'chayotze behen min ha'ikarim. Ikarim, I think, of what they call purgatives. She'enon ela l'refuah. Remember, medieval medicine used to purge stuff out of the body as though, because they thought of everything was in the balance of humors, the four humors in the body. So to reestablish the humors, they wanted to push out the one that was too excessive. Those that are strictly medicinal, if kilayim doesn't apply to them. And now the Rambam says, also, Ketzad, Hamarkiv ilan be'ilan, a person who grafts one tree to another. Kugon shehir kiv yichor shel tapuach. He took a branch, right, that he was going to use for grafting of an apple, and he put it in an esrog tree, or the other way around, or esrog b'tapuach. I have no idea what you're going to get for it. Hareza loka min haTorah b'chol makom, bein ba'aretz, bein b'chutz la'aretz. So, kilei ilonos, okay, got to be careful, right? They're not all the same. Everywhere in Eretz Yisrael, any place. V'chen hamarkiv yerek be'ilan o ilan b'yerek loke b'chol makom. That's a law of everywhere. But now he says a sort of interesting law. Hazoreh, I had to include this one because it's really, it's sort of, you might think of it as counterintuitive. Hazoreh azroem kilayim, v'chen hamarkiv ilanos kilayim, afa pishahu loke, harei elu mutarim ba'achila. After you do the grafting, after you plant the stuff together, okay, you're allowed to eat it. Amazing. Va'afilu lazeh she'ovar uzron. I never knew this, that's for sure. I mean, learn something that Lamed al manas lilmod. I mean, that's the best way to learn is to teach.
Is really that halacha l'maaseh?
Yeah. Va'afilu lazeh she'ovar uzron. The guy planted, the guy grafted the tree, he was over the lav, but ultimately when the fruit comes out, he's allowed to eat from him. Shelo nasar elas riyasan bilvad. Furthermore, umutar litai yichur men ha'ulon shehir kav kalayim v'lizroa mizera hayerek shenizra kalayim. Once you have the tree that was the product of grafting, that was crossbreeded, there's no problem in propagating the crossbreeding. Namely, you take this and you plant it. Okay. So that's
Halacha l'maaseh, all the etogim today and all the oranges are kilayim. If you learn the history of orange, it's unbelievable. It's not so remote from the orange that we know today, 1,200 years ago.
Oh,
okay.
I'm sure. I mean, we can't. Does anybody ever ask a Shaila that the food you're eating is not a result of some grafting? No, no one ever has said. But now we come to something else. Now we come to the following. Kilei hakerem, kilayim in the vineyard. Hazorea shnei minei tvua, 2 types of grain. O shnei minei yirakos, or 2 types of vegetables. Im zera hakerem, with grape seeds, right? Hareza loka shtayim. Achas mishum sodcha lo sizra kilayim, va'achas lo sizra karmecho kilayim. So first of all, because you put 2 of them together, that's an avera all of its own. And because you threw the seed of the grape in with it, okay, that constitutes kilayim hakerem, of the vineyard. And that turns out to be much more stringent. Ve'ena loka mishum zorea kilei hakerem, ad she'yizra be'eretz Yisrael, chita usa'ora v'chartzon. Chartzon is a grapeseed. B'mapolas yad, he has to do it in with one hand, namely with one movement into the dirt. He has to do it, and it's only in Eretz Yisrael. V'chein im chipa osam ba'ofor loka. If they were placed in the ground and he physically covered it with dirt, he transgressed. V'chein im zora shnei minei yerek v'chartzon. O zora echad yerek v'zora echad min tavua v'chartzon b'mapolas yad harei zaloka. Any mixture of 3, it doesn't have to be pure two grains. It could be 2 grains, 2 vegetable, or a mixture plus a grape seed, and that's how, and he transgressed. And here it's a little different. Okay, there's a cat. This caught my eye, so I thought I'd include this. The enochayev min haTorah ella al kanbus, which is hemp. Okay, hemp is a cannabis from which you make marijuana, but hemp itself is actually multi-usage. Okay, so when it's used as foods, its seeds we use as foods.
Don't we use it for the beer? We use it for the beer, no? For the beer we use it, no?
Yeah. And luf is, I looked it up. What's luf? Luf is arum. Now its leaves are slightly poisonous, so it's very often used for cures, but as food is used for the tuber, like a potato for the bottom. It has a tuber at the bottom. Okay, a bulb at the bottom of the plant. The shape, the bulb at the bottom, that's what you eat. But its leaves are used medicinally because it's a mild poison. Okay. Actually, we need Yitzchak. We need Padaman here today. He was a farmer. He knows about this stuff. Okay. Aval sha'ar hazroim, others asurim midivrehem. You see, what you plant with the vineyard is you have to have something that ripens at the same time as the vineyard, so that all the things become finished at the very same season. Okay, but others, it's a nisa midrabanan. Excuse me. Now, kilei zroim, you can plant, right? We've just read Rav Yosef planted kilei zroim. You can mix them up and put them in the ground, But in Chutz La'aretz, you're not allowed to do kilayim in the vineyard. So the Rambam actually gives a cheshbon that is mentioned in the Gemara by Rav Yosef. V'lama asru kilei hakerem b'chutz la'aretz, v'lo asru kilei zroyim. Why are you permitted to plant kilayim with seeds alone in chutz la'aretz and not kilei zroyim? V'bnei shekilei hakerem chamurim heim. They're much more stringent. Why? Here's the difference. She'im nizru be'eretz Yisrael harei hen asurim b'hana'ah. You got to know which category you're in. If you do kilayim in the vineyard, the thing has to be completely ripped up. No hana'ah can be obtained from it. Okay. For kilei hakerem. V'cheven shehen asurim b'hana'ah ba'aretz asru l'zaran b'chutz la'aretz. Because the law was so stringent, therefore, to maintain consciousness of the law, you're not allowed to do it in chutz la'aretz. But kilei zroim, we said not only can you have hana, you can eat it. Not only you can eat it, you can replant it to create more of it. So that's no problem. Okay, we'll do Arla, and then with that we'll finish today. Okay, we didn't start planting yet, right? Because we only know what you're not allowed to do. Okay, so we finally plant, but we're not getting close to eating yet. The second thing is Arla. Ha'arla ketza. Okay. This is in Hilchos Ma'acholos Asuros, things you're not allowed to eat. And then later he'll come back and do the details of Arla. Arla ketza. Kol hanotea ilan ma'achol, anybody who plants a fruit tree. Kol peiros she'oseh oso ilan shalosh anim mishanata. Excuse me. Harei hein asurim ba'achilo b'hana'o. You can't eat it, and you can't even have any benefit from it. Shenamar shalosh shanim yihya lochem arelim lo yeyachel. V'chol ha'ochem ehem kezayis lokem en haTorah. Again, this is a lav sheyesh bo ma'aseh. B'amed dvorim amurim. When does this apply? Benotea be'eretz Yisrael, because it says in Vayikra Yud Tes, that's in Kedoshim, Parshas Kedoshim. Kisava'u el ha'aretz, and it describes that you're not allowed to eat for 3 years. Aval isur Allah b'chutz la'aretz is halacha l'Moshe miSinai. It's a different kind of halacha. Shevadai Allah b'chutz la'aretz asura. Excuse me. No, I'm okay. I'm about to finish. That outside of Eretz Yisrael, if you know that a tree is in the first 3 years, you're forbidden. But Sveika, if you don't know anything, you're allowed to eat from it. Okay. Ubehilchos ma'aser sheni, when I talk about the laws of Ma'aser Sheni, I'll explain why in a moment. Yizboer dvorim ha'asurim mishum orlo, dvorim hamutorim. What's going on in Ma'aser Sheni? As we'll find out, Ma'aser Sheni you bring up to Yerushalayim to eat it, and it's yours, but you have to eat it in Yerushalayim. Well, a brand new tree after 3 years, the mitzvah is the next year, the 4th year, it's called Neta Ravai, and you bring it to Yerushalayim to eat it. So the Rambam put it's really called Hilchos Ma'aser Sheni v'Neta Ravai. Okay, so over there he gives the full discussion of the laws, and that's what he does. Okay, so next time I'll do the Lechet Shicho Peah, Prado Olalos next time. And then maybe I'll do a beautiful brisa in the Rambam about general charity. Okay, we'll do that. And then we'll go, in the third talk, we'll go to Truma, Maser, and those kind of things. Okay?
Yes, Sheila.
Yeah.
If you take a tree and you put a yichur,
Yeah.
and how many years you count? That's
Oh.
how you count.
Yeah, oh, you're asking now, is it Orla? Okay.
Yes.
No, you have to look it up. The truth is, you have to look up the details. I'm purely guessing because I'm tabula rasa here. I have no idea. But I would
Okay.
guess that it's not a new tree, right?
Yeah.
Because you have a tree that's established that you can eat from it. I mean,
Did
if the original tree is young, of course you wait, right? If the
No
original
doubt.
tree is after 4 years old, more than 4 years old, and you put a graft in it, okay, the new fruit.
That's no shayla, no shayla.
Right, yeah.
The question
But
is,
I'm sure you'll
what you
find
think-
it in the Ram. Well, you have
When
to
you
look it
count-
up.
when
Yeah,
you count the
really
years, when you count the years, are they simply calendar years? Or do we do for Rosh Hashanah Le'ilanot and you might
Right,
plant
well, what did the
tree?
Rambam say? I think the Rambam was kind of, from this language, I have to check whether it's that, but from this language of the Rambam, I thought for a second, he said, "She'oseh oso shalosh shanim mishenotah."
That's wonderful.
Okay, mishenotah, from when he planted. So the first guess,
Well,
I
that-
think the
that
Rambam
would-
is explicit. I'll look it up. But from when
That would be calendar years. It doesn't the Rosh Hashanah Le'ilanot sort of,
yeah.
you know,
When you first
expedite
read this
or-
alone, excuse me, when you first read this alone, you think it's what? It's 365 days all the way around. It's year to year. The Rosh Hashanah Le'ilah knows, first of all, for Arlo, it wouldn't apply to Tu B'Shvat. That's something else. It would if it applies to anything, it's Rosh Hashanah, and I'll look it up and check it for next time. Okay, I don't know. I'll check
Rosh
it.
Koch. Very interesting.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So we'll pick it up next time, guys. All right.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
Okay. so
Thanks,
good
Isaac.
job. All right. Okay.
Bye-bye.